it just seems to me that this is changing, or attempt anyways, to change fundamentally what government's role is in society. And I saw an article the other day. It called Trump FDR in reverse. And of course, FDR meaning Franklin Delano Roosevelt, president during the New Deal, who fundamentally, and the New Deal fundamentally changed what government's role in society was. And I want to ask you, are we living in a moment in which we're seeing sort of undoing, or at least an attempt to undo what government has done in society for the last almost 100 years?
Yes, the short answer to your question is that's what we're seeing. But let me expand a little bit on it. It is not new. The undoing of the New Deal has been undertaken about 5, maybe 6 seconds after the New Deal was passed. It has been the objective of the employer class in this country since the 1930s. They have pursued that objective pretty single-mindedly. They have given the Republican Party the major task of doing that, but they've demanded that the Democrats at least don't stand in the way, and the Democrats, particularly in recent years, have obliged. That is, the difference between the two parties, which started out, we the Democrats are the party of Franklin Roosevelt, you the Republicans are the party that is opposed. It became instead the Republicans are the ones who want to roll back the New Deal quickly, and the Democrats want to go much more slowly. And I understand that, and that's the politics we've lived with. But here's the things I would add. When Roosevelt brought the government in, he said over and over again, we have to do this to save capitalism. In other words, he wanted to underscore he's not the enemy of capitalism. He's not a red. He's not a socialist, any of that. He is bringing the government in for something that socialists and communists wouldn't have wanted, namely the preservation or the strengthening of capitalism. And there's a certain irony, because if you listen carefully to Mr. Trump, he's kind of making the same claim. He's bringing back a robust capitalism because it isn't here anymore. MAGA is a statement that what used to be is better than what we have, which is why he would put it on his little red hat. He is also, in his mind, and in the mind of the employer class of the United States, saving capitalism. Although his recipe is not bring the government in, it is the opposite, kick the government out as the way to solve it. And he's doing it literally taking, a meat cleaver and chopping off agencies of the government. Just for example, as a professor, my students are hysterically worried. Many of them are partly sustained by government grants because they work on research programs or on data gathering procedures within the university or within collaborative agreements between universities and other institutions. Everything is up in the air. They don't know whether they will have this job. They therefore don't know whether they will have the money without which they cannot finish their educations. They don't know where else to turn. Some of them have tried to go get jobs in the private sector, which is, of course, what all of the laid-off public employees are going to be doing, and that's driving down. The private employers are understanding they can get one of these refugees from a public job and pay them much less and give them much poorer working conditions than they had to give before.
I had thought about that. Can I just follow up on that? Because I had thought about that. We are coming out of a period of time in which we saw the labor market being very favorable towards workers. And I'm wondering if this is also part of a response to that. Now, all these people that are losing their federal jobs, now you're going to have more people who need jobs and trying to flip.
They won't. That's right. The federal government is laying off. The private sector sits there with an influx of desperate people who can't go back to the public sector. Let's remember that when you fire the way they're doing, you fire, for example, a person who's been there for 10 years. That's their career. They expected to move up a certain kind of career ladder, which is established in most government jobs. And if you do your job well, then after a certain number of years, you get promoted to some other higher level. All of that's gone. It's not just that they don't have their job and they don't have their paycheck, but it's also that their career is gone. If they're going over to the private sector, they come with no seniority, with no accumulated anything. And, it's just, it transforms their life. It transforms the lives of their families and anybody who depends on them. It affects the community because these people are going to be saving money for the unknown future they face rather than spending as they might otherwise have done. So as an economist, I can assure you the ramifications of this are staggering, and they're carefully avoided being spoken about. Not one word from Mr. Musk, not one word from Mr. Trump about all of the consequences. So there's there's no nice way to say this, Mitch. There's this phony representation. Here's the nice things we say are associated. Well, what about all the other things? Well, not a word about it. Give you a simple example. The first thing that an unemployed public employee in this country does is to go on unemployment insurance. Everybody understands that. All right, let me be an economist now. While you were working for the U.S. government, they paid you and you did your work. Now they fired you, but you go on unemployment. The government continues to pay you a little less than what you got before, but the difference is you don't give anything back because they fired you. But the cost to the government, whatever the benefit is of not paying your salary, you'd have to subtract from that the fact that they now have a new unemployed person to give unemployment insurance to. That's a cost to the government. And you'd have to weigh the cost. Whoa, and you're giving the government, the worker a little less money, but you're not getting any of whatever it is that worker was doing. And that's not a good deal. And that's a very bad deal.
Well, it depends what your goal is, right? Because that unemployment will dry up, right?
That's right.
That's not forever.
It's not forever, but it means if you're honest and you're going to do this all in a big sudden rush, which is what they're doing, then the impact on the unemployment fund will be severe because it's so concentrated in a short amount of time. And so what will that do to the government's budget, to its balance? And of course, if these people stay on longer unemployed, well, then, that also has economic effects. Those people do not stop eating when their unemployment runs out. They still need a jacket. They still need a place to sleep. They still need transportation. They're going to be consuming goods and services in this country, but they're not going to be able to contribute to producing them. For the society as a whole, this is an enormous cost. That's why we feel bad when there's unemployment. It's considered a social problem because the people who are unemployed could contribute. We know that because they held the jobs for years. They do their job. And when they go unemployed, they continue to consume goods and services, but they no longer participate in producing them. You don't need a genius to understand for the society as a whole, that's not good. But you're right, Mitch. There is something good here. And you know what it is? It's good for the employers because what's being done, and if I have nothing else to say to you today, this is the issue. This is all part of what deserves the name however scary you find it, of class war, class struggle. This is the employer class being handed by the government they have put in what they dreamed of, a desperate American working class. You may not feel it yet, but you will. Even if you're in the private sector, these cascades of government workers deprived of their livelihood, that's going to impact all of us sooner or later, one way or another, probably in lots of ways. But the net effect is crystal clear. Wages coming down and job security gone. I mean, when I was a young person, I thought of working for the government. And I remember people advising me in my own family, if you work for the government, you won't get paid as much, but you will have job security.
A pension.
Okay. Millions of people were led to believe that and believed it. And they made decisions about where to live and what kind of job to look for and whether to take out a mortgage to have a home with their family based on an assumption of security. Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk have taken a meat axe to that. Even if you haven't yet lost your government job, think a minute. Your security is gone. You're seeing what's happening in the offices around you. You're not crazy. You can see, I could be next. Will they get to me next week, next month, next year? How am I going to live my life like this? I went into this job being told by the employer, by the HR department here, that this was a secure job. If I did my job properly, I could count on it. All that's gone. That has been taken away from millions of people. They are going to live with that, and they are going to exude the economic and the emotional costs of all of that. None of that is being faced. We're being told, isn't this wonderful? We are becoming more efficient. Oh, my God. That's putting a lipstick on something that remains a pig even after you've put the lipstick on.
I feel like this is well understood within the administration, even these immediate negative effects that you talked about with the number of people who go on unemployment. I even recall, I don't remember his precise words, but I recall before the inauguration, Elon Musk admitted that there will be some immediate short-term difficulties, but in the long run, it would pay off.
Well, you know, it's always been the argument, always, of the business community, that anything and everything they do, even if it causes some pain, will in the long run. Look, that's what we teach in the university. I'm a little ashamed of it, but that's what we were taught, and that's what I was required to teach. So, for example, when an inflation happens, prices go up. That, of course, hurts people whose income didn't go up equivalently and who are therefore squeezed by the inflation. Oh, my professor would say to us, oh, but you have to look at the other side. And we would all look, yeah, what's that? Well, as the prices go up and the profits they make are greater, more entrepreneurs will be incited to come into this business and produce more. So, and that's a good thing, isn't it? And we all, like dutiful graduate students, we all nodded. But the problem is, suppose you have a capitalist system in which people understand what our teacher just told us, and the employers understand what we do when we raise prices is make it harder for others to come in, because then we enjoy the high prices and nothing happens to undo if we actually let all those people in that the college teachers tell those gullible students will show up, then those prices will come down, which we don't want. We didn't raise them for them to come down. I mean, the naivete, and let me say it, I mean, you know, you're an honest man. That's why I like you.
Try
so
to be.
Handle it. You can handle it if I'm honest. Economics is a profession. I've been there all my life. I'm an economics professor now. But our profession has failed in two ways. Number one, the economic literacy of the American people is really sad. It's there's no other word for it. It's not the people's fault. It's the educational system that has been unable or unwilling to deal with that reality and overcome it. And the second is the reason for the first. It's because it's too dangerous. The people who run this society are prepared to educate a few, like me, but they don't want the general population to understand it. And that's because they're ripping the people off left and right all the time, and they don't want it exposed. I hate to put it like that, but I've been doing this for 60 years. That's what I learned.
In line with what's happening right now, your last show touched me. You are surrounding your life by psychotherapists or therapists. I know terms actually matter, so if I got that off a little bit, forgive me. But you had a show about empathy and kind of a lack of empathy that we're seeing right now. And just the cruelty to me that I'm witnessing, I think is the most alarming to me, that concerns me the most among everything, because it starts off with cruelty towards immigrants. Then you go towards, may not always be in this order, but cruelty towards transgender people. And now we're seeing, cruelty towards Marxists. But now we're seeing cruelty, just even the way that they are firing these government workers. It's in the most undignified way. They're even being trash talked as they're on their way out. You would think you would say, thank you for your service, thank you for what you did. But no, none of that. And it just makes me wonder, where is the line for these people? When I see a constant element of cruelty, where is the line for these people to actually stop? And where would it be for them?
I brought on Tess Fraud Wolff. She's a professional therapist. She makes her living doing that. I should mention, in case people are wondering, yes, she is my daughter. I'm immensely proud of her, as I am of my wife, Harriet Fraud, who does the same kind of work.
I think this is fundamental to your work, right? Because you are always, you surround yourself with psychotherapists, if that's the correct term, and you are always thinking about the economic impact, the psychological impact that economics
They have taught me. I am deeply in their debt. If you find the work that I do in economic analysis, please know that one of its contributing sources is the psychological teaching that both my wife and daughter have given me as a gift, part of our relationship, and part of why I bring them on. I want to share what I learned by having it available to basically to all of you. Okay, let me start then by answering. In the harbor, not very far from where I am sitting, is this thing which we call the Statue of Liberty. And it says, bring me your poor, your hungering, your folks yearning to be free. It doesn't make distinctions beyond that. It's a welcome. It is something that once upon a time, and I believe will come again, will be something of which this country is uniquely proud, that it is a country that said to millions around the world, there is a way to do better than the situation you're stuck in. Come here. We will help you find a job, a home, a way to live that will be more useful to you and to the community than what you can expect in wherever you come from. And so we became a nation. The ugly thing we did, which is to exterminate the indigenous people that were here, was at least partially offset by a generosity to a different group of people. It's not much social justice there, but there is something to be proud of. We're now living through the negation of all of that. We're living through not just deporting millions of people. I think many of you may have seen that news story where our government deported 150 odd Venezuelans stuck them in Guantanamo prison. These are people who were convicted of nothing, whose crime, if it is a crime, and the Statue of Liberty suggests it isn't, but if it is a crime, their crime is they're undocumented immigrants. That shouldn't qualify you for Guantanamo, which was a prison for people that are considered maximally dangerous, putting aside whether that prison was reasonably used or not, which is itself another blot on our nation's. But here we are taking immigrants and doing the opposite of what we did. And that ought to make you wonder. And if you have some empathy, try to think what it means to have been a loyal, hardworking, tax-paying immigrant for months or years, and to be suddenly yanked out of all of that and thrown out without due process, without a chance really to make your case, as is clear from many documented examples. Part of the problem of going at breakneck speed, having demonized the immigrants beforehand, is that you treat people very poorly. Where is the due process? Where is the innocent until proven otherwise? Where is all of that, which once seemed intrinsic to American behavior? I'm going to make you a bet. 10 years from now, we're going to have an avalanche of movies and books and songs in which we look back on the time we're living in now in disbelief at what our leaders were doing and saying. My God, what happened to us as a nation is what will be the theme. Let me put on also my economics hat, since the one I have, for better or worse. Let me explain something about immigration, because our leaders will not dare tell you this. Here are by the way, the economics of immigration is a very old topic. It's been around for hundreds of years. There's a vast literature in every decent library about it. So nothing I'm telling you is unique to me. I'm just bringing you information that should have been guiding our leaders, but isn't. Most immigrants that come to the United States are young people. They're in the ages of 18 to 30. In other words, they're in the prime of their productive life. These are the times when they give back to society all of the resources invented in feeding them since they were born, dressing them, sheltering them, educating them. All of those expenses are what we invest in our children to bring them to the age when they can join the labor force and be productive. You know what an immigrant is? Immigrant is a subsidy to us, because the cost of feeding, clothing, sheltering, and educating that young person from age 0 to age, say, 20, that's been borne by the country from which they come. From Mexico or Guatemala or El Salvador or Africa or Asia. They come ready to work, costing the United States nothing by comparison to a native born. We had to pay for that. Look, and I'm looking at it from the society as a whole. Part of the cost is paid by the family. Part of the cost is paid by the society, which our taxes help to pay for, of course. The immigrant brings his or her productivity. We put them right to work. Now, we're not very nice to them. We give them the worst jobs, in the worst neighborhoods, in the worst schools, all of that. We've been doing that for 150 years. But we give them, or we used to, a place. And mostly they've been very grateful. And mostly, guess what? They made America great. Because the immigrant is a subsidy, it helped economic growth in the 19th and 20th century for the United States. And because our economy grew, we could welcome and accept immigrants. It was a win-win situation. And you know, when you stop taking them and you deport them, It's a lose-lose proposition. It's not good for America. It may look good to Mr. Trump's base. He's being hard-nosed on citizenship. But for our economy, it's a disaster. It's horrible to sacrifice all that the immigrants gave us for the political career of a hustler. Let's think a little carefully. If you had brought those immigrants in properly, give them a decent job, give them decent housing, put them in a decent neighborhood, then there would not have been any competition between them and the people already here who had jobs. We know that's a friction point. We know that generates anxiety. Okay, deal with it. Give everybody a job as a matter of right. First, American citizens, for sure. But then do that for immigrants. And if you can't do it for more than 1 million a year or 100,000, then limit. But do it right for those who can. That would be illogical. We don't do that. We let the hostility build. We let demagogic politicians see an opportunity for a career by making it worse, feeding. And if the people who are immigrants might have a different color skin, well, then ratchet up your racism and work it that way too. That's not empathy. That's not decency. That's not human solidarity. That's a very ugly moment in American history.
And it makes me fearful. And it makes me fearful of where the line is drawn again. Where do you stop? You know, where
the people running this society have shown us they don't stop. They don't even see the issue, let alone they don't talk about it. They don't. You watch Mr. Musk prancing around. Let's not miss the imagery here.
I mean, they're purposefully doing Nazi salutes.
Even before you get to that, if I were in the position of authority, and if I wouldn't, but if I had reached the conclusion that I am going to have to lay off tens of thousands of public employees, the last way on earth I would do that is to have the richest billionaire on the planet prancing around a stage with a chainsaw as the image of doing that. The billionaire who floats in money is destroying the livelihoods of tens of thousands of ordinary people working every day, 5 days a week for their income. This is so grotesque that's why I'm saying when we look back on this 5 years from now, we the American people are going to shake our heads and find it difficult to believe what was normally on the press every morning now.
I want to pick up where you left off there, Richard Wolff, about the man who is leading this effort is the richest man in the world. And, you know, we're hearing out there, and I understand it. We need to stop saying the word fascism. You know, we talked a lot about fascism in the first Trump presidency, and I don't think we had a fascist takeover of the government in the first Trump presidency. I think Donald Trump has always had some fascist tendencies, but I never saw the government as being a fascist government. And now we hear from some on the left, we need to stop saying the word fascism. But when I talk about the cruelty that's being employed here, I mean, fascism's kind of a style, right? It's not like a programmatic bullet point of here's what it is. It's the strong will do what they can, the weak will suffer what they must. Sort of comes from the Melian dialogue of ancient Greece. And when we see this being headed by the richest man in the world, and we're seeing, and you talk, I mean, it seems like there's a corporate, I think there's a corporate takeover of government happening. And there is, when it comes to fascism, right? A blending between the corporate world and the state. what do you think about the term? This is something you've studied deeply in time. What do you think about the term fascism?
Well, let me begin with a moment of transparency. My father's sister, Beatrice, was killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz. My maternal grandparents, my mother and father of my mother, were killed in Mauthausen, another German Nazi concentration camp. So I don't come to this neutral. I would say 3/4 of my extended family, my grandmother was one of 9 children, just to give you an idea. I would say 3/4 of my extended family were killed as part of the so-called Holocaust. So I grew up. Personally, I was born in Ohio. I did not participate in any of that. But if you have that in your family that way, you hear about it, you pick it up, you have all the sensitivity that young children always do. Your children, in case you don't know it, always know you better than you think they do, no matter how hard you try to avoid it. So I picked up all kinds of messages along the way. And one result was that when I went to school, I was desperate to understand what happened. I should explain that my parents loved German culture. I grew up listening to Beethoven, Brahms, and Bach. That was the music that filled the house. I was taught to revere the great German poets, Goethe, and others. It's just, I grew up on the German cuisine that my those relatives that were left cooked, and so forth.
You became a Marxist.
What?
You became a Marxist.
Right. And German was my first language. I speak German to this day. I speak French because my father was French. So I speak English, obviously, as my major language. I've been a professor here in the U.S. all my life. But I studied it, so I can answer your question. When capitalism hits a really serious problem of survival, one of the ways, not the only one, but one of the ways it stabilizes itself, it recoups itself so it can go on, so it can survive, is by arranging a merger between the state and the leading capitalist employers. So, for example, global capitalism stumbled very badly in the Great Depression of the 1930s. Everybody who studies any history knows that. Here in the United States, our capitalist economy collapsed. Unemployment in 1933 was at the rate of 25%. 1 in 4 workers was out of work. Every single family in America was therefore affected, either by mom or dad having no job, or by Cousin Harry or Aunt Louise, or so forth and so on. Well, it happened in Germany too. The capitalist economy of Germany collapsed in the 1930s, right after 1929, just like it did here in the United States. Only the difference between the two countries was remarkable. In the United States, the working class, suddenly thrown out of work, suddenly treated rather like Trump and Musk are treating government workers now, only it was then government and private just disgorging people into the unemployed. The American working class reacted to that experience by going sharply to the political left. They joined labor unions in a way no Americans had ever done before. That's the period when the CIO, the second half of the AFL-CIO, that's when it was created, in the depths of the Depression. That's when we had very large socialist and communist political parties here in the United States, and they worked together with the unions. And they all went and they captured, in a way, the president, Mr. Roosevelt, that you mentioned before. He became an ally of theirs and they of him. And we got unbelievable left-wing introductions into America. The Social Security system, we'd never had that before. The unemployment compensation system, we never had it before. The minimum wage, we never had it before. And 15 million government jobs, we never had it before. Wow. Germany was the opposite. In Germany, the working class split. Half of it went to the left. Yep, joined socialist, communist unions. But the other half went very far to the right. They joined the Nazi Party. And the ruling groups, the capitalists, therefore had a choice they didn't have in the United States. In Germany, they could choose, how we get the country back under control? Do we go left? Do we go right? They made the decision we all know. They went to the right. And they created fascism, the merger of the dominant capitalist employer class and the Nazi Party. And they then went to work to kill in large numbers, to exile in large numbers the Marxist, socialist, communists, which were winning about half the vote. Let me drive home. That's what's happening now. There was an election last Sunday in Germany in which the old conventional parties, the ones that looked like Republicans and Democrats, had their worst showing ever. And you know who's emerging? On the right wing, an inheritor of the fascistic approach, and on the left wing, the German parties called Die Linke, which in German means the left, together with an offshoot of the Die Linke, named after the leading woman politician, Sarah Wagenknecht, they together are surging on the left. German capitalism, like American capitalism, is in great trouble. And as it falls apart, it is tempted either to recoup itself by merging with the government, and that's where Mr. Musk and Mr. Trump come in, isn't it? Versus going to the left. That's going to be fought out, that issue, in every country, ours included.
We're really down to our final couple of minutes here, Professor, and I'll have to give those numbers again at the end. We are trying to raise the funds to keep this station on the air. But, you know, I've heard we're living in a moment in which the world order that was created after World War II is coming apart. The Bretton Woods, the international treaties, all of this is international law, the way we have known it. It's all sort of coming apart right now. And it sounds like we're returning. This is a lot, and for all of its faults that the New World Order had, there's always a possibility of it being worse. Yes. And maybe you can argue it was worse right before the New World Order. And it sounds like this has allowed for fascism to raise its ugly head again.
Yeah, it's a moment of transition, no question. I think you're right. I think the post-war II arrangements are done. We're seeing it now. Every day, everything after World War II was meant to undo the difficult fact that in World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies, not enemies. After the war, everything switched. They became enemies. And Mr. Trump is seeing that maybe the way forward for the United States, now that its capitalism is in the kind of difficulty he, of course, can never admit, is to rethink all of that and see if we can be friends with the Soviets, only now they're the Russians. And Mr. Putin will have to be reversed from the demon to the ally. We managed that with Stalin both ways. We certainly can manage it with Mr. Putin. And I think you're going to see over and over again that we are more and more with each headline. And the thing I would alert most to is that the real challenge to the United States is now very clear, in my mind. It is the People's Republic of China. I don't mean challenge militarily, although they are that too. They are a challenge where it really counts for the United States, and that is economically. And that has to be dealt with. Either you come to terms with them or you continue on the current belligerent collision course, and that way lies war. And that's so disastrous for all of us that any rational person ought to be concerned that we not go in the direction of the Trump government, but seek to sit down and work out with China, as with Russia, a peaceful management of all of us on this planet, because the alternative is beyond words.
Richard Wolff, thank you.